Brooklyn, New York, a borough full of life, with its diverse neighborhoods, bustling streets, and the constant hum of city life. Nestled in this vibrant environment was Westbrook High School, a respected institution in the heart of the community. It was here that Vanessa Carter, a 34-year-old English teacher, spent her days. She had a reputation for being tough but fair, and her students often spoke of her with a mix of admiration and fear. Vanessa had a sharp tongue and a keen intellect that made her a force to be reckoned with in the classroom. At home, though, things were different. Vanessa lived in a modest brownstone on a quiet street, far removed from the energy of the city. Her husband, David, was a long-haul truck driver, often away for days, sometimes weeks at a time. Their marriage had started with passion and love, but over the years, it had grown cold. The long absences, the missed anniversaries, and the mundane routine of everyday life had taken their toll. Vanessa found herself feeling increasingly isolated and unfulfilled, trapped in a life that had lost its spark. It was during one of David's extended trips that Vanessa first noticed Chris Williams. Chris was a senior, 17 years old, with a natural charisma that made him popular among his peers. He was a star on the basketball team, tall and athletic, with a smile that could light up a room. But beneath his confident exterior, Chris was struggling. His grades were slipping, and he was in danger of not graduating. Vanessa always wanted to help a student in need and offered to tutor him after school. Their sessions started out innocently enough, focused on catching up with schoolwork and preparing for exams. But as they spent more time together, Vanessa began to notice things about Chris that she hadn't before. The way his eyes lingered on her a little too long, the casual touches that sent a thrill down her spine, and the way he seemed to hang on her every word. There was an electricity between them, an unspoken attraction that neither could ignore. One evening, after an especially intense study session, Chris leaned in closer than usual. His breath was warm against her skin as he whispered something that made her laugh. A deep, genuine laugh that she hadn't heard from herself in a long time. Without thinking, Vanessa reached out and touched his arm, and in that moment, something shifted. Chris turned toward her, his eyes dark with desire, and before she could stop herself, their lips met in a kiss that was as passionate as it was forbidden. That kiss was the beginning of an affair that would consume them both. Vanessa knew it was wrong, knew she was crossing a line that could never be uncrossed, but the thrill was too intoxicating to resist. Chris made her feel alive again, made her feel wanted in a way that David hadn't in years. They began meeting in secret, stealing moments in empty classrooms, in Vanessa's car, and in the dark corners of the school where no one would think to look. But Chris wasn't the only one who noticed the change in Vanessa. Elijah Clark, a 16-year-old junior and star football player, had always had a thing for his English teacher. He was cocky and confident, with a swagger that made him irresistible to most girls his age. But Vanessa wasn't like the other girls. She was older, more sophisticated, and Elijah was determined to get her attention. He started staying after class, asking for help with assignments he didn't really need help with, finding excuses to be near her. At first, Vanessa brushed off Elijah's advances. She was already involved with Chris, and the last thing she needed was another complication. But Elijah was persistent, and eventually, Vanessa found herself drawn to him in ways she hadn't expected. He was different from Chris, bolder, more aggressive, with a confidence that was impossible to resist. One day, after a particularly heated argument with Chris, Vanessa found herself alone with Elijah in her classroom. The tension between them was palpable, and when Elijah leaned in to kiss her, Vanessa didn't pull away. Their affair was different from the one she had with Chris. With Elijah, it was all about the physical, about satisfying a need that had been building inside her for years. They were reckless, meeting in risky places, pushing the boundaries of what was safe. Vanessa knew she was playing with fire, but the thrill was addictive. Elijah made her feel powerful, like she was in control for the first time in years. But the fire wasn't out. Vanessa found herself drawn to yet another student, Isaiah Mitchell. Isaiah, 18 and a senior like Chris, couldn't have been more different. He was quiet, studious, and thoughtful. Isaiah was the type of student who stayed after class to discuss literature and philosophy, not to flirt with his teacher. He had a depth that intrigued Vanessa, a sensitivity that reminded her of the dreams and ambitions she'd once had before life had worn her down. Isaiah had always admired Vanessa from a distance. She was everything he aspired to be, intelligent, cultured, and strong-willed. When he started spending time alone with her after school, discussing books and ideas, he felt a connection that was deeper than anything he'd experienced with his peers. Vanessa, too, found herself opening up to Isaiah in ways she hadn't with Chris or Elijah. Their conversations were intense, filled with shared insights and personal confessions, and it wasn't long before their relationship crossed the line from intellectual to intimate. Their first kiss was tender, almost hesitant, a stark contrast to the fiery passion she shared with Chris and Elijah. With Isaiah, it was about more than just the physical. It was about the emotional connection, the sense of being understood. Vanessa knew she was in too deep, but she couldn't bring herself to stop. She craved the attention, the excitement, the feeling of being desired by these young men. But as the weeks went on, the pressure of maintaining 3 secret affairs began to weigh heavily on Vanessa. She was constantly on edge, terrified that someone would find out, that her career, her marriage, her life would be destroyed. The thrill of the affairs was starting to wear off, replaced by a growing sense of dread. The boys, too, were becoming more demanding, more possessive, each one wanting more of her time, her attention. The tension reached a breaking point when Chris, Elijah, and Isaiah started to suspect that they weren't the only ones in Vanessa's life. Each one began to notice the subtle signs, the way she seemed distracted when they were together, the mysterious text messages, the occasional slip of the tongue. Jealousy started to brew, and with it came anger, resentment, and a desire to confront the truth. Brooklyn, with its crowded streets and watchful neighbors, was about to become the epicenter of a scandal that would shatter lives. Vanessa had thought she could control the situation, that she could keep her secrets hidden. But she was about to learn that the web she had spun was far more tangled than she had ever imagined. The tension between the boys continued to build. They were like predators circling the same prey, each one vying for Vanessa's attention, each one determined to be the one she chose. Chris, driven by jealousy, began to watch Vanessa more closely. He followed her after school, noticing the way she lingered in the halls, the way she seemed to have secret meetings behind closed doors. It didn't take long for him to realize that he wasn't the only one. One evening, after a particularly tense day, Chris decided to confront Vanessa. He waited for her in the parking lot after school, his heart pounding in his chest, his mind racing with thoughts of betrayal. When Vanessa finally emerged, he stepped out of the shadows, his face a mask of controlled anger. "Who is it?" he demanded, his voice low but intense. "Who else are you seeing?" Vanessa froze, her heart stopping for a moment as she realized that the carefully constructed facade she had built was beginning to crumble. She tried to laugh it off, to play it off, but Chris wasn't having it. He stepped closer, his body tense, his eyes burning with a jealousy that Vanessa hadn't seen before. "Don't lie to me, Vanessa," he warned, his voice shaking with emotion. "I know you're with someone else. I want to know who." Vanessa hesitated, caught between the truth and the lies she had been telling for months. Before she could respond, Elijah appeared, his usual swagger replaced by simmering anger. He had seen them together, had noticed the way Chris seemed to have a special hold over Vanessa, and he wasn't about to let it slide. "What's going on here?" Elijah asked, his tone accusatory, as he approached the two. He looked from Chris to Vanessa, his expression darkening as the pieces began to fall into place. Chris turned to face Elijah, his fist clenching at his sides. "You tell me," he spat. "What the hell are you doing here?" Before Elijah could answer, Isaiah appeared at the edge of the parking lot, having seen the other two boys from a distance. Unlike Chris and Elijah, Isaiah had never been confrontational, but the sight of the two boys with Vanessa, the realization that his worst fears were coming true, pushed him to act in a way he never had before. "What are you doing?" Isaiah's voice was quiet, but there was an edge to it that Vanessa hadn't heard before. He stepped forward, his eyes locked on Vanessa, searching for answers, for some kind of reassurance that what he was seeing wasn't real. Vanessa was trapped. The three boys she had been juggling were now standing before her, their anger, jealousy, and betrayal written across their faces. There was no way out. No way to defuse the situation. The truth was out, and the consequences were about to come crashing down. Chris, his emotions boiling over, took a step toward Vanessa. "How could you do this?" he demanded, his voice cracking with pain. "I thought I meant something to you." Elijah, never wanting to back down from a fight, shoved Chris back. "You're not the only one she's been playing, man," he snarled. "But I'm not about to let her make a fool out of me." Isaiah, standing on the edge of the confrontation, felt a surge of emotion he couldn't control. He had always been the quiet one, the thinker, the one who avoided conflict. But seeing Vanessa in the middle of this, seeing the way she was being pulled in different directions by Chris and Elijah, something inside him snapped. "You're both wrong," Isaiah said, his voice trembling with intensity. "She's not some game you can win. She's a person, and you're tearing her apart." The situation escalated quickly. Elijah, never one to back down, swung at Chris, his fist connecting with a sickening thud. Chris stumbled back, but quickly retaliated, launching himself at Elijah with a fury that had been building for weeks. The two boys were soon locked in a brutal fight, fists flying as Vanessa watched in horror, unable to stop what she had set in motion. Isaiah, desperate to protect Vanessa, tried to pull Elijah away, but in the chaos, he was dragged into the fray. The three boys, once friends, or at least acquaintances, were now enemies, driven to violence by their love for the same woman. Vanessa's attempts to intervene were futile. The boys were too far gone, too consumed by their anger and jealousy to listen to reason. As the fight raged on, the situation grew more dangerous. In the heat of the moment, Elijah grabbed a loose metal pipe from the ground, swinging it wildly at Chris. The blow landed with a sickening crack, and Chris went down hard, blood pouring from a gash on his head. Vanessa screamed, rushing to Chris's side, but it was too late. The damage had been done. Seeing Chris on the ground, motionless, Isaiah lost control. He lunged at Elijah, tackling him to the ground, his fists pounding into Elijah's face with a fury that surprised even himself. Elijah fought back, but he was dazed. The fight quickly slipped out of his control. In the chaos, Vanessa scrambled to her feet, her mind racing. She had to do something. She had to stop this before it got even worse. But as she looked around, she realized with sickening dread that there was no stopping it. The boys were out of control, and she was powerless to stop the violence that she had unwittingly set in motion. Isaiah, in a blind rage, reached for the metal pipe that Elijah had used to strike Chris. He swung it at Elijah, the force of the blow knocking him unconscious. The fight was over, but the damage was irreparable. Elijah lay on the ground, blood pooling beneath him, while Chris remained motionless, his breathing shallow and labored. Vanessa stood frozen, her mind unable to process what had just happened. The boys she had cared for, had loved in her own way, were now lying broken and blooded at her feet. The reality of the situation began to sink in, the gravity of what she had done crushing her under its weight. The affair, the secrets, the lies, all of it had led to this moment. A moment that would change all their lives forever. The sound of sirens in the distance brought Vanessa back to reality. Someone had called the police, and they were on their way. Panic set in as Vanessa realized the enormity of what had just happened. There was no way to cover this up, no way to make it right. The truth was out, and there would be consequences. Consequences she had never imagined when she first crossed that line with Chris. When the police arrived, the scene was one of chaos. Elijah was taken away in an ambulance, still unconscious, while Chris was rushed to the hospital in critical condition. Isaiah, dazed and covered in blood, was handcuffed and placed in the back of a police car. Vanessa was questioned on the spot, her mind numb as she tried to explain the unexplainable. The media quickly descended on the school, turning the story into a national sensation. The scandal rocked the Brooklyn community, and Vanessa's life was torn apart. Her marriage, her career, her reputation, everything was destroyed in an instant. She was suspended from her job pending an investigation, and soon the full extent of her relationships with Chris, Elijah, and Isaiah came to light. As the story spread, Brooklyn became a hotbed of gossip and speculation. Local news channels set up camp outside Vanessa's once quiet brownstone, capturing every moment of her descent from a respected teacher to a public disgrace. Neighbors who had once admired her for her dedication to her students now whispered about her scandalous behavior. Vanessa found herself isolated, not just from her community, but from her own family. Her husband, David, returned to find their life in ruins. The betrayal cut deeply, and despite his initial shock, he was unable to forgive. He filed for divorce, seeking to distance himself from the chaos that had engulfed their lives. David moved away from Brooklyn, leaving Vanessa behind in a place that now felt like a prison. Without her marriage and her career, Vanessa was left to face the consequences of her actions alone. The weight of her decisions began to crush her. Once a proud and assertive woman, she now struggled with overwhelming feelings of guilt and shame. She found it difficult to face herself in the mirror, let alone the world outside. The emotional toll of the scandal led her into a spiral of depression, where she questioned every choice she had made and the life she had thrown away. The boys involved in the scandal each dealt with their trauma in their own ways. Chris, critically injured from the confrontation, faced a long and painful recovery. The once promising athlete was now left with physical scars and emotional wounds that haunted him daily. His dreams of a sports career were dashed, and he struggled to find a new direction in life, grappling with the sense of betrayal and the violence he had experienced. Elijah, despite being a key player in the altercation, was left with his own set of challenges. His injuries were severe, and the incident had a lasting impact on his mental health. The experience made him withdrawn and bitter. He faced the public's judgment and the legal consequences of his actions, all while trying to deal with the trauma of what had happened. Elijah's confidence was shattered, and he struggled to rebuild his sense of self amid the chaos. Isaiah, too, was deeply affected. He was sent to juvenile detention for his role in the incident. The experience was harsh, and the time spent there forced him to confront the gravity of his actions. Although he had acted out of what he believed was defense, the reality of the violence he had participated in weighed heavily on him. Isaiah tried to use his time in detention to reflect and work on personal growth, but the path to redemption was long and uncertain. The aftermath of the scandal left a deep scar on the Brooklyn community. Westbrook High School, once a place of learning and growth, now stood as a symbol of betrayal and failure. The school administration faced harsh criticism for their oversight and the lack of preventive measures. Efforts were made to rebuild trust within the community, but the damage had been done. The focus shifted to ensuring the safety and well-being of students and addressing the systemic issues that had allowed the situation to unfold. Vanessa's story, while tragic, became a cautionary tale. It served as a reminder of the consequences of the abuse of power and the importance of vigilance in protecting those who are most vulnerable. The community, while scarred, began to heal with support systems put in place to address the emotional and psychological impact on everyone involved. In the end, Vanessa's downfall was a complex and multifaceted tragedy. It was a story of betrayal, heartbreak, and the devastating consequences of choices driven by desire and desperation. The echoes of that fateful night lingered long after the headlines faded, a stark reminder of the fragility of trust and the enduring impact of one's actions on the lives of others. Vanessa Carter's life was irrevocably changed as she faced the grim reality of her situation. With the trial concluded and the media frenzy gradually fading, she was left to grapple with the consequences of her actions. Her marriage had dissolved, her career was in ruins, and her reputation was shattered beyond repair. She had been sentenced to 25 years in prison, with eligibility for parole after 15 years, a harsh but inevitable outcome given the gravity of her crimes.